Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Jess and John podcast. I am Jess,
And I am John. Welcome back.
and we are joined with a very special guest, Mr. Stephen Donziger, who was trying to get a pardon. We're trying to get Stephen a pardon. He deserved a pardon from the Biden administration, but did not get it. Stephen, why don't you tell us what that means and where you're at now?
Sure. Well, it's great to see you guys. Thanks for having me. So the reason I was seeking a pardon is because I'm a lawyer and I helped, Amazon Communities in Ecuador win a landmark $10 billion pollution case against Chevron. To retaliate, Chevron basically had me prosecuted by a corporate law firm, and I'm the first person targeted with a private corporate criminal prosecution in this country's history on a what I would argue is a baseless charge of misdemeanor contempt of court because I wouldn't give them my confidential case file on my computer, which they were trying to get to like spy on what, our legal team was doing to try to force them to comply with this judgment we had won in Ecuador that they didn't want to pay. So all of that led to a really weird situation where they convinced a judge to charge me with criminal contempt of court. The case was rejected by the Department of Justice for prosecution under the Biden administration. I'm sorry, that was under the Trump administration. This goes back to 2019. And then the judge at that point appointed Chevron lawyers at a Chevron law firm to basically step into the shoes of the US government and prosecute me because of my successful human rights advocacy. And our country has never seen anything like this. It's never happened before. It hasn't happened since. Clearly violates the rule of law, clearly is unconstitutional. By the way, 5 federal judges have already ruled that the case against me is unconstitutional. And it also was used by Chevron to try to intimidate activism, the whole climate movement. It really sets a dangerous and even terrifying precedent for all advocates, regardless of your politics or regardless of your issue. Like corporations just should not be allowed to prosecute and jail their critics. And it happened to me. So all of this resulted in me being denied a jury and convicted by a judge who was a leader of the Federalist Society of a misdemeanor charge of contempt of court, which she then had me detained for almost 3 years, even though the maximum sentence from the charge was 6 months in prison. Um, this happened between 2019 and 2022. So I was seeking a pardon from President Biden for all of these very compelling reasons. Number one is I need to get this conviction, this baseless conviction, off my back so I can continue my lawyering and my human rights work, especially on behalf of the people of Ecuador, who I've represented now for 30 years. And second, like I really hoped that the president would have seen my pardon request as an opportunity to send a clear message that we are not going to have a kind of society in the United States where corporations can lock people up. Unfortunately, the president did not grant my pardon. I mean, obviously, we know he granted a pardon to his son Hunter, who had been convicted by a jury of multiple felony accounts. He preemptively pardoned 5 other family members on literally his last day in office. And even though I had the support of 34 members of Congress who had written him urging him to pardon me, I had the support of around 120 prominent civil society organizations, environmental groups, human rights groups like Amnesty International. They had written him asking to pardon me. Several Nobel laureates were backing this campaign. He just wouldn't act. And I later found out because there were people on the inside as various discussions were taking place that, because of our advocacy, we had pushed this to the very top of the White House. But also, once it got traction, Chevron lawyers began to furiously lobby to kill my pardon. And in the end of the day, unfortunately, the president did not pardon me. So here I am now in the Trump era, um, having to deal with the fact that I have a criminal conviction. my clients in Ecuador are suffering and dying of cancer and other diseases. They've confiscated my passport, I believe illegally, but I cannot travel right now out of the country. Have not been to Ecuador in 5 years after having traveled there over 250 times over a 20-year period. And I also have no bank account because Chevron, essentially without telling me, based on a secret court order, went in and took all my money about 5 years ago. So I survived by raising money that goes into a legal defense fund to help me pay my bills. So all of this could have been alleviated to a great degree with a pardon, and it's really disappointing that the president didn't grant it. Really disappointing.
Now, Stephen, I feel like I've been lucky to talk with you a lot about your case. I'm going to ask you a question I've never asked you before. So this was
Okay.
a huge settlement,
Yeah.
over $12 billion for Chevron, which is a huge fossil fuel company responsible for a lot of environmental destruction. Like you said, giving cancer to people near where they operate. And so many of like Biden's supporters and liberals in the United States and just like people on the left in general see fossil fuel companies as criminally culpable for what they've done to the planet and to people. And so getting a settlement like this made you a target for the huge fossil fuel companies, but it's also huge. And it seems to be aligned with people who supported Biden, who voted him into office. How much of your reception by these folks do you think is influenced by the stigma of, now you're on home monitoring, you're labeled a criminal? How much do you think that's influenced how people look at you and your case and have empathy for it?
Well, that's a great question. If you go back to why Chevron targeted me with this criminal prosecution, I mean, it is my view that the main purpose was to criminalize me, to sort of convey or signal to the world and to people watching this, even casual observers, that I must have done something wrong. I mean, most people believe if you're prosecuted for a crime, you probably did something wrong. And most people believe if you're convicted of a crime by a judge without a jury, as I was, then I certainly had to have done something wrong. And what most people don't realize is there are cases, and mine, I believe, is one of them, where innocent people get prosecuted in this country for political reasons. And I believe that's what happened to me. So it's taken me a good long while to, speak to people like you and other independent journalists and, to get on social media and to get materials out there that explain what actually happened. And I think over time, I've been able to get a huge amount of support precisely because people recognize that this was a political persecution by an oil company of a climate justice lawyer. I mean, 5 federal judges have ruled the case against me was unconstitutional, even though technically my conviction still stands, including 2 Supreme Court justices, um, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, 2 gentlemen that I agree with on virtually nothing, were so offended by this private corporate prosecution that they issued a written decision out of the Supreme Court that it was unconstitutional. By the way, it wasn't a court decision. Basically, they wrote that in the context of me trying to get the whole court to review my case. And when the court voted not to review my case, they wrote a dissent to that decision, which called the case unconstitutional. And then, I have the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. For those who don't know what that is, that's literally the world's leading legal authority on arbitrary detentions, illegal detentions, people detained for reasons of conscience. And they looked at my case, very unusual. They don't usually do not look at cases in the United States. I'm only the second one ever. And they determined that my detention violated the rule of law, was arbitrary, violated U.S. obligations under international law and under our Constitution. So between the 5 U.S. judges and the 5 international judges, that's 10 judges who've looked at this and decided it's a bunch of BS. And then on top of that, I have the 34 congressmen who wrote a phenomenal letter to President Biden explaining what I'm describing right now, and all the NGOs, Amnesty International. So if you add all that up, I would say that Chevron's campaign to criminalize me and to isolate me and to take away my credibility has failed completely. But it took a lot of work and a lot of, what do I say, like resilience, frankly, including 3 years of detention when every day I'm not just sitting on the couch. I'm like getting up and fighting and talking to people and writing legal briefs and doing Zoom interviews like this from my essentially my jail cell here in this apartment. It took a lot of work, but I believe I've climbed out of it. And frankly, right now I feel as strong as ever. And I just want to emphasize that this happened to me. I mean, it's bad that it happened. It's a playbook that if we let them, they will apply to other people who hold them accountable for their abuses if they want to. Um, you know, but ultimately, like we do have the power to overcome it. And it did happen because we won the case in Ecuador. I mean, people need to remember we won an unprecedented, the largest environmental judgment ever on behalf of indigenous peoples over an 18-year litigation. This came down initially in 2009, affirmed unanimously on appeal in 2013 by Ecuador's Supreme Court. Like they lost the case and they had wanted the case in Ecuador. They had accepted jurisdiction there. They couldn't handle the fact that indigenous groups, rural farmer communities with virtually no money were able to connect with lawyers like myself and others in the United States and around the world and vanquish this powerful energy company, in a court of law. So rather than abide by the decision in the court where they wanted the trial held, they literally spent hundreds of millions of dollars. They hired dozens of law firms. They used hundreds of lawyers to try to destroy me. And thank God I had the support and solidarity I did. Thank God I'm a lawyer, so I could sort of understand how to at least begin to navigate this. But man, it was not easy. Okay. It was not easy. And it's cost years and years of my professional life dealing with it, which is exactly what they want. So, they wanted people to look at me and be intimidated into not doing this work, doing, human rights work against corporations. They want people to look at me and be demoralized. They want people to look at me and think you can't do this. And I would just tell people you can do this. I'm an example of how to do it and how to get through it. And by the way, the case is still ongoing, viable, and they're still feeling an enormous amount of risk over this, which is why they lobbied President Biden so hard to kill my pardon.
Yeah, your case spans multiple administrations of both parties, right? And in spite of the support, the massive amounts of support that you have coming, from a lot of different corners that you've outlined so far in this in conversation, you're still fighting. And I'm wondering what that says about the influence that these major corporations have over both major American political parties. I think Donald Trump is back in the White House, so all of a sudden everybody's got their eyes and ears perked up to everything that's bad. But a lot of those things have roots even in the Biden administration. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about the influence that seems to span on the part of corporations, uh, multiple parties and administrations. Can you talk about that?
Sure, sure. It's a great question. I mean, look, my take is both major political parties in the United States are essentially corporate political parties. I mean, the Republicans are seem to be wholly owned by the corporate sector, including the fossil fuel industry. And the Democrats, not quite as bad, but they've been subjected to so much corporate influence that they've sort of been defanged, they no longer really represent worker interests. I think we saw this in the recent campaign. And now we have a president who's essentially a full-blown corporatist who is trying to, you know, weaken the federal government, weaken the institutions that protect the most vulnerable among us, that protect the working class. And I think ultimately this is going to lead to a great kind of heist of money where, they're going to just end up cutting taxes for the wealthy again, and paying for it by cutting programs that serve those in need, like Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. Even though they say they won't, that's where this is all heading. So, I think we need alternatives. I don't think there's no political party in America capable, that is outside of this system that's capable right now of winning a national election. There's structural barriers to, independent third parties. I think we need a European style political system where you have multiple viable parties and you have, legislatures that have multiple parties in them such that innovation can take place, coalitions can form, and governance can happen in a more effective way than this completely sclerotic corporatist system we now have in the United States that is essentially, in my opinion, it's destroying our country. I mean, it's completely undermining our democracy. It is destroying the planet. It is locking people up like me who are human rights lawyers, and it's leading to significant, po levels of poverty, homelessness, lack of health care, et cetera, et cetera. And, it's just amazing that the country in the world with the most wealth, which is the United States, is so utterly incapable of meeting the basic needs of the majority of its citizens. And my only take on that, since I've been watching this my whole damn life, and I'm older than you guys, okay? I voted, by the way, in 11 presidential elections in my life. The first one was in 1980. I voted for Jimmy Carter, and he lost, okay? So I've seen this get worse and worse for decades. And I think we're at a point now where we're entering a period of serious crisis. And it's very unclear where it's going to end up. I mean, there's some extremely disturbing things happening in our country right now. And there's a huge amount of deception going on to, so, you know, these, a president who essentially represents the oligarchic class takes power acting like he's a friend of the working class. So, these are disturbing trends, and I don't think my corporate prosecution could have happened um, without kind of these tendencies we've seen take root in our society really over the last 4 or 5 decades, but they've been greatly, greatly accelerated, I'd say, in the last 20 years, last 10 years, last 5 years. I mean, it's to the point now where I'm actually quite concerned about the future of our country.
Yeah, you can say that again. I think a lot of us are sitting out here and certainly feeling what you're talking about. I want listeners and the public to be aware of the tools that are being used against you. And I'm wondering if you can talk about, laws that were passed a long time ago for one thing that are now being used for other things. Talk, if you can, about
Sure.
RICO that was meant to break the mob. Now it's being applied to activists, people like yourself, those who are fighting against the expansion of these cop cities everywhere, getting hit with RICO charges. You have terrorism charges being brought up in the case of Luigi Mangione. Can you talk about the security state kind of after 9/11 and how those laws that were passed for one thing are being used against folks like you?
Yeah, man. That's another really good question. So, not to go on and on, but like there is a whole history of laws being passed for one purpose, later being manipulated by those in power for a more nefarious purpose. I mean, the RICO, the racketeering law that was passed by Congress in the 1960s to target the mob, is now being used, by corporations to try to criminalize activists like myself. And Chevron did this to me through its law firm Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher. The racketeering law requires evidence of a conspiracy of people to commit crime. And so, but the crazy part about that law is it allows a civil party, a private party, to use it in a private civil lawsuit against anybody. So while the government can use it to prosecute, criminal conspiracies, and the government prosecutors generally exercise discretion and they don't bring fake cases, not always, but 99% of the time, these cases are real. But a private party like Chevron can just take the civil side of the law and create a case out of it and accuse me and Pablo Fajardo and Julio Prieto and all the lawyers in Ecuador of engaging and also indigenous leaders down in Ecuador, like Humberto Piaguay. This is crazy. They said we were all engaged in a conspiracy just by doing the lawsuit against them over pollution, that our conspiracy was to extort money from them. And the purpose of this was not to like necessarily win money from us. It was just to create a litigation that they could use for PR purposes to try to taint us as wrongdoers and to try to essentially flip the script so the people they poisoned ended up being the people victimizing the big oil company. That was the whole point of this case. And the RICO statute was manipulated, completely undermined by Chevron to accomplish this objective. And it was amazing the way judges, and this is really the weak spot in our system, judges let these types of harassment lawsuits, they're called SLAPP lawsuits, they're illegal. They're designed not to litigate really. They're designed litigate on the merits. They're designed to harass, intimidate, and silence advocacy through the weaponization of the law. And it's amazing to me the number of judges that just let these cases happen. I mean, these things should be just recognized at the outset, dismissed, and those who bring them should be punished. They should be fined, massive sums of money to discourage the abuse of the law in this way. But it just blows my mind how judges either don't see it or they have pro-corporate tendencies themselves, and they let these cases happen. And the punishment is in the case happening. It's not necessarily in the result because it takes often millions and millions of dollars, years out of one's life just to defend the accusations, even if they're bogus. So it's disturbing. And, we're seeing lots of laws, um, new laws since, RICO in the last few years that the oil industry has convinced state legislatures to pass, where they, impose draconian punishments on First Amendment protected protest and speech if it happens to happen at an oil installation. Like they get extra protection. And in the case of Jessica Resnicek, who is someone I followed closely, she vandalized in an act of peaceful, nonviolent civil disobedience the Dakota Access Pipeline. And at her sentencing, she faced a maximum prison sentence of 3 months. But the judge imposed this weird mechanism called a terrorist enhancement. She did nothing to harm anybody. The judge determined she was a terrorist for vandalizing a pipeline that was destroying the planet and gave her an additional 5 years in her sentence. So her 3 year sentence became an 8 year sentence. Look, in Germany or France or the UK, this kind of person for this level of offense either wouldn't go to jail at all or might spend 2, 3 months in jail. She's spending 8 years. And this is, again, is industry using law to try to silence dissent, silence its critics, discourage advocacy, chill free speech, so they can just get away with their operational activities, which are really hurting the vast majority of people.
I remember being at the news desk in Rising when I was at the Hill and searching up something I'd seen on Twitter to sort of fact check it, but it was a quote attributed to Mussolini that said, fascism is most accurately described as corporatism because it is the merging together of the corporation and the state. And when I looked it up a few months ago, it was like, yes, Benito Mussolini said that. And
Mm.
now when you search it up, it's like, well, it's been attributed to him, but we don't know where it came from. And I think it's interesting that for some reason the Google search renders a different response now.
That's
But
very
uh,
interesting.
I still think it's a pretty accurate description of what fascism is and kind of what's happening here and what I think
Yeah.
a lot of people are afraid is happening under Trump, given his campaign received $96 million from fossil fuel companies in lobbying funds, and that his whole energy policy is drill baby drill. It seems like he's totally in cahoots with big oil, which does make me nervous for the possibility for you to get a pardon under Trump, but I still think it's worth trying. Anything can happen. He proposed the TikTok ban and then decided to be the guy that saved TikTok. So who knows what will happen there? But what are the day-to-day impacts of your prosecution? Are you wearing an ankle monitor? What are the restrictions on you? Whatever you can share.
Yeah, sure. So, I'm not wearing an ankle monitor,
Okay.
but I did wear an ankle monitor living in this house, for 993 days, minus 45 days where they actually sent me to a federal prison. And again, that was between 2019 and 2022. But, I'm not really free. Why do I say that? I can leave my apartment now, and I can go anywhere, travel anywhere domestically in the United States or its territories, but I cannot leave the country because they took my passport. And they took my passport on the theory that I needed to be sanctioned, i.e., punished, for not giving them my computer in this civil case. I'm the only person, I believe this is blatantly illegal, by the way. I'm the only person in US history, as far as we can tell, who has ever been denied the right to travel over a discovery violation in a civil litigation. Like these happen all the time. People, worse, they'll get fined. But this again is the Chevron prosecution, and they don't want me to travel because that means I can actually meet lawyers in other countries who could potentially sue Chevron to force compliance with the Ecuador judgment through the seizure of company assets in places like Canada or Brazil, Australia. Chevron operates in dozens of countries. So they don't want Steven Donziger leaving the United States of America because I'm just too dangerous to their business model. I mean, it's quite extraordinary if you think about it. And what's even more extraordinary is that judges go along with this crap. I mean, the judges are supposed to be the bulwark against corporate abuse of people like me. Instead, the judges have been made an instrument of the abuse, at least in my case. Not in every case, in my case. And that's where it really gets scary. And it really goes back to the earlier question about corporate power. You know, think about it. Okay, the main purpose of government is to protect the welfare of the people, protect us. Protect us from corporate predators and from crime or from invasions of foreign countries, et cetera. Okay. And what's happened really is government, in my opinion, is now become part of the problem. It doesn't protect people. It has been bought out to a great degree by the wealthy, by the oligarchs, by the Elon Musks of the world, by the Chevrons of the world, and then twisted to serve private interests rather than to protect the public. Now, I know that's a generality, and I know it's a generalization because the government also does good things for people. But as institutionally it's changed to a great degree over my lifetime, to the point now where it's seriously compromised. And it's also reflected in the fact that both major political parties are right-wing parties. I mean, the Republicans are an extremist party. Like if you were to put the Republicans in Germany, they'd be the AfD. They are an extremist, racist, kind of fascist-leaning party right now. And the Democrats are just like a center-right Christian Democratic Party right now. I mean, they don't really take a stand for workers and for people who are denied health care. I mean, they don't propose solutions. Where's Project 2025? Where's their version of Project 2025?
Hey, we
Why is Trump? What's that?
Said we're probably out at brunch right now instead of writing up a 2025 plan, you know?
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, think about it. The reason Trump has come in like a gangbuster, okay? Like it's like the Kentucky Derby, man, when those gates, is that what they call them? Gates
Yep.
that when they open and the horses just spring out. That's what he's done. I've never seen anything like it. It's because they had a plan and they'd been training for this for 2, 3 years, and they started to implement the plan on, really like weeks before he even took office. They started implementing, like he started acting like he was president before he was president. Now, why can't we see the same degree of boldness from a national political party that protects the working class?
Question
Why
that's
can't the Democrats write up a plan?
yeah, I think
I
we're all
mean, it's pretty
too.
wild, right? If you think about it. I mean, one thing you got to admire Trump about is he had a plan. And he's governing based on that damn plan. And Biden never had, I mean, he had a kind of a vague plan element of this, a few things here and there that he did, some of which were good, but there was never a coherent sort of animating principle to anything to he did. It was always like give a crumb here and then I'll appease that guy and the corporates and then the labor unions. I mean, there was never any overarching governing principle like the Republicans have. And without that, we're never going to create any kind of meaningful change. So, I think our political system is bankrupt. I really do. And I blame the Democrats. I think the Trump came in because of a complete failure of the Democratic Party to offer an alternative to voters that would animate them and motivate them and excite them. It was awful. I mean, watching the campaign was just really depressing, and I can say that basic things. I mean, I read an article by Ralph Nader. I love Ralph Nader. You young people need to learn who Ralph Nader is because he's another person that the corporate media is trying to erase. He is probably one of the most influential men in our country in the last 100 years, and he fights for consumers and he fights for people. Okay. And Ralph Nader wrote an article and he said, like, why can't Kamala like make raising the federal minimum wage a key plank in her economic plan? Or why can't she propose increasing Social Security benefits? Not just maintaining it, increasing it. Instead, now we have an administration that wants to cut it. But like she never proposed like just basic shit that we clearly can afford as a country that would have helped, tens of millions of people put food on the table and live better lives. And she couldn't even propose it. And that's the Democrats crying out loud. So, I on that point, I really think we need a viable multi-party system with viable third parties.
Yeah, yeah. I think the appetite out there is definitely shared by a lot of people. And to me, I see just a lot of straws piling on the camel here. I mean, the reaction, not to speak of the act itself, but the reaction to the United Healthcare assassination. I mean, you have people across the spectrum out there just saying this is a joke of a system. And it's not only confined to healthcare, but virtually every other part of our life. From the time we wake up to the time we go to bed, there's all kinds of things that the richest country on earth should be doing much better. But to go off of that, it seems that we are pretty far down a bad path here.
Hmm.
You have been busy over multiple decades fighting, the richest, most powerful corporations on earth and their allies in government. Those forces seem pretty powerful at a time when our problems are also pretty large. Wealth inequality, any other problem on the face of the earth, we've all seen it before, except for how far advanced we are in climate change right now. So things are pretty bad. Can you give us the truth about what we need to understand to effectively fight back in this political moment? Maybe speak to a younger version of yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you. I mean, look, my advice to young people or and middle-aged people and older people, okay, the first step is to try to have a clear analysis of what is actually happening. Like you cannot get a prescription for change without understanding what you're seeing. And there's so much confusion right now. There's so much BS in the corporate media. Incessant focus on like irrelevant stuff to distract us from the coming heist, which is in play right now with the Republicans, who are going to basically cut, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera, to fund tax cuts. That's what's really behind all this chaos right now, as I see it. So you got to be clear about what's happening. You got to, you know, then decide what kind of action you're going to take where you're sitting, in your community and what you're going to do. Everyone has to engage. It is not the time to pull out. They want us to pull out. We must engage and propose, a vision of a just society that everyone can feel invested in, not like what we have now. And it's not really my role to tell people what to think. There's tons of papers out there and information, but as a general matter, just understand that it is going to take clarity of analysis, number one. Number two, the ability to organize. We need to organize power and build power. So it's clarity of analysis, organizing to build power, and then action toward, a real concrete result that can improve the lives of lots of people. And, look, I'd love to start or help lead some other political movement that can deliver for the American people what we all deserve. It's a monumental task, but it is very viable and possible if we understand, sort of what I believe would be the most effective strategy. But, my advice to young people is just, you know, careful on the information, decontaminate the crap from your head every day. It's a daily, multiple times a day process to keep your head straight, and to get good sources of information and to be able to think critically. And, most importantly, stay engaged, find a role and act. Act. They call it an activist for a reason. You're acting. So, I've been doing this my whole life, ups and downs, no doubt. But right now we're in a really critical moment, and I think there's an enormous opportunity for young people to really get engaged and sort of build the world you want.
Why don't you tell us what you have going on? I
I hope
see.
that doesn't sound too, yeah.
Oh no.
Go ahead.
I
I
don't
was gonna
think
say, I
so.
hope that doesn't sound too hack.
Oh no. No. I think we need a reboot
It's
of
like your mom. It's like your mom.
yeah.
No, it's like your mom. Like, oh, come on, go to school today. Just try. It just sounds a little hackneyed, in light of the monumental nature of the problems we're facing. But like, if millions and millions and millions of people did that, we could actually create change.
Yeah.
Yeah, something we said on our last recording of this podcast was like, just talk to people about what's going on. Just try to get through to
Hmm.
them a little bit to realize that it's kind of all of us versus the elites. And we told people to message the show about how those conversations go and just empowered everyone that listens to this podcast to just
Interesting.
talk to people in your life. That can
Yeah.
change everything. And so we're going to be sharing some of the organizing experience we have in having those conversations. Tell us where you're hitting a block, what people are saying. So I'm really excited for us to do a full episode on that. But I want to ask you, what do you have going on? How can people support now? Is there an appeal to the
Yeah.
Trump administration you're making for a pardon? What's the
So
work look
there's,
like?
yeah. Thank you. I mean, I'm really busy. So there's basically three things that I'm concretely trying to accomplish in the next phase of my life, my interesting life here. I mean, one is I want to finish my book. I have a book contract, and I've been so busy like trying to get a pardon, raising money, you know, doing social media that I really need to raise money to finish the book because I just so people know I don't have a job. They took my law license and I'm dependent on donations to my legal defense fund to to live. I mean, my wife works, but she has a very modest salary at a nonprofit, and we have a kid and whatever. So I raise money, and the best way to help me, if you're able to help even with a very modest donation, we'd appreciate it, is to go to the website freedonziger.com, and there's a donate button. The money goes to a defense fund at a law firm in Seattle, Friedman Rubin Law Firm, and then it's dispersed according to criteria. It doesn't go to me; it goes to the law firm, and then they help us with our bills and also help me pay my legal fees. Okay, so that's number one, book. Number two is I have decided, in light of the denial of my pardon request, I am very likely going to file a legal motion to get my law license reinstated. And in this motion, I'm going to describe the really the abuse that Chevron visited upon the legal system and upon me with distorted and false evidence, paid witness testimony, and all sorts of kind of lurid details of what they actually did. And that's going to be a significant amount of work, involving lawyers and probably a year worth of time. I mean, not my full time, but like a lot of work over a year or more. And we need support for that. Again, you can go to freedonziger.com. So it's the book, it's getting the law license back, and it's also getting the passport back, which is going to take a whole other piece of litigation. And then on top of that, people say, well, are you going to try to get a pardon from President Trump? I mean, I don't know. I don't think President Trump would be inclined to pardon me. I've been very critical of him. He's very, as you know, transactional. But, maybe he would. And he does, I think at some level he gets how the law can be weaponized for political purposes more than any other president. And he feels that he was targeted with the same kind of, weaponization. I mean, if you disagree, that is how he feels. He does get the concept. And I know people who know him. I mean, maybe it'll happen. I'm probably not going to do a campaign for it like I did with President Biden. I'm just going to do my work, try to get my law license back. And if he were to pardon me, great. I think he should pardon me. I think any president should pardon me. I don't think this is a Democrat Republican issue. I don't think it's a right or left issue. It's a rule of law issue. The idea that a corporation could jail somebody in the United States should be offensive to everybody. So, I'm hoping he'll pardon me, but I'm not going to wait around. I'm going to start doing the other things I need to do to get my law license back and hopefully be able to finish the job against Chevron. I mean, they need to pay the people of Ecuador that they poisoned. So, that's something that's always top of mind for me. So I have a lot to do, too, obviously.
That's just a minor to-do list. Yeah, in the year of our Lord
Yeah,
2025.
I mean, I hope that sounds viable to people. Like that, wow. It's like, what are you doing today? I'm going to work. I'm going to go to a movie tonight. You're like, oh, what are you doing? I'm like, well, trying to save my professional career, fend off an oil company that's hunting me down, and try to help Amazon communities in Ecuador not become extinct and collect on the money they're owed by this oil company. I mean, it's a lot,
Just a lot of
but
things for
I'm honored. Honestly, I'm honored to represent these communities. I mean, it's really sad, that they haven't been able to get, you know, the money they legitimately won yet, but I believe they will. And I believe as a result, a lot of lives will be saved.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a to-do list that matches the magnitude of the time, Stephen. It's totally appropriate. Well,
Thank
we
you.
appreciate you coming on the show, and everyone should follow Stephen to, keep up with what's happening. But also, you do a lot of good work supporting, this call for a general strike. That's very cool. I
Yeah.
see you doing an event. You want to mention what that is quickly?
It's an event on the 13th of February at 8 p.m. And it's a Zoom call, people all over the world. I mean, the people who organize this have this idea that if we can like do a general strike like you saw in France a couple of years ago over the increase in the retirement age, it would really create a lot of power to help the working class. So it's an idea. Again, because of the media and other reasons, most people here don't even understand, the history of things like general strikes, and that we have the right to do that. So, the people organizing this are trying to get that idea circulated, and, we're just going to discuss it. So, it's February 13th, uh, uh, at 8 p.m. And if you go to the Instagram post is General Strike for Resignations, General Strike, the number four, and then I think the word resignations, you can get the information.
Very cool, Stephen. Thank you for coming on the show. Whenever I talk to you, I feel like it puts a little bit of a fire under my butt with everything we have
Oh,
going on in
that's
the
really
country.
good. And listen, thanks to both of you for having me and for what you do. I'll sign off by giving you a little compliment. I think that independent media, like of the type you guys practice, not just with this podcast, but other things you do, is just absolutely critical. And it's just a great way for people to connect outside of the corporate media structure, which really denies access to information and issues that would allow people to mobilize. So what you do is a critical part of what I care about. So I thank you for doing what you do, and I'm honored that you invited me on to share your platform.
We
Thanks for coming
appreciate
on,
it,
Stephen.
Stephen. All right, bye everyone. We'll see you next time.